The Battle of Cambrai in November 1917 is a completely new way of using tanks. Now we're actually using them en masse, over 500 of them.
The stage is now set for what will become the first massed armored attack in history. November 1917. British tanks have been on the World War I battlefield in small numbers for more than a year, proving they have a role in modern warfare. Now, Allied commanders raise the stakes drastically. They send not dozens, but hundreds of tanks to the Western Front, all of them manned by history's first specially trained tank corps. The era of the massed tank attack is about to begin.
The motto of the British Tank Corps is through the mud and the blood to the green fields beyond. And that was what had been looked for throughout the Great War, and that was what they hoped to achieve.
With the new tank corps, the Allies hope to punch holes through the Hindenburg Line and capture the strategically important city of Cambrai. The Germans have made this part of the line one of the most heavily fortified sectors on the Western Front. There are more than 250,000 troops, dozens of machine gun posts, a maze of barbed wire, and for the first time, specific countermeasures against the tanks.
One of the great antidotes to the tank was the Hindenburg line, with trenches, say, 16 feet wide. And that was done on purpose to defeat the tank's one great ability to cross trenches.
Now we're actually using them en masse, over 500 of them. We're now using the Mark IV tanks, which are much, much better.
The Mark IVs have thicker armor, making them less vulnerable to machine gun fire. November 20th, 200,000 troops and almost 500 tanks are poised for an all-out strike on the Hindenburg Line. And the first massed tank attack in history begins. Advancing with them is Major William Watson.
To right of me and to left of me, in the dim light, were tanks. Tanks lined up in front of the wire, tanks swinging into position. There was one tank to every 30 yards of front. When the guns began, the tanks were moving over the crest of the hill. The enemy trenches were already enveloped in thick smoke.
The German defenders are taken by surprise.
All hell broke loose. I could see the trench lit up by a sea of flame caused by the incessant exploding shells.
The sentry suddenly made an extraordinary remark. Herr Leutnant, something four-cornered is coming.
Then we saw a whole chain of these steel monsters advancing towards our trenches. I clung onto the hope that the trench would be wide enough to present the tanks with an impassable obstacle.
It's also realized that some of the tanks need to be equipped with fascines, or very big bundles of brushwood, and these are put on the nose of the tank. The intention is they can drop them into the very deep German trenches. The Hindenburg Line has enormously deep trenches. Without them, they'll become bogged.
They had a system to go over trenches, while one tank was dropping wood in the trenches, covering the second tank. The second tank was going over the trench, and that was like a murderous ballet rolling towards them. So the mass attack of the British tanks was very successful.
The tanks made rapid progress, crossing the trench to our left and right, maintaining heavy fire against the trench. We were utterly defenseless in the face of these monsters. This was no longer a battle. This was a massacre.
The Germans, facing the mass attack at Cambrai, were facing a new dimension of tank attacks, and they had no technical and psychological instruments to cope with it. They were completely overwhelmed on a military and a psychological base.
It looks like an overwhelming victory, but the battle for Cambrai is far from over. And the Germans have prepared a lethal surprise for the steadily advancing Allies. November 20th, 1917. The Allies launch history's first mass tank attack. Almost 500 new British Mark IV tanks lead infantry across the first trenches of the Hindenburg Line and advance towards their objective, the French city of Cambrai.
It's incredibly successful. The enemy, it would appear, have no way of dealing with this large number of tanks.
The tanks have crossed two lines of German defenses and now stand poised to break through the Hindenburg Line. Tanks of H Battalion are among waves of armor, moving up the right shoulder of Flesquières Ridge. Tank Harrier, commanded by Major Gordon Hassel and the others, stop at the summit. Cambrai, the Allied objective, lies in the distance. It seems too good to be true.
I said to my driver, Sergeant Callahan, I don't like this somehow. I don't know why.
A shell from a German field gun destroys Hong Kong. Harrier and the other tanks tried desperately to get out of its range.
We're going downhill, and we're able to get up a bit of speed. Then I heard a tremendous explosion and saw one of our tracks go flying through the air. But then we got another hit which carried away our roof. Then the third shot crashed through the back and we were out of action.
The gun that destroys Harrier also hits Huntsman and Harvester. The Germans have sprung their surprise, unleashing fire from a weapon that quickly becomes their main tank killer, the 77mm Krupp field gun. Normally used for indirect fire on trenches, the 77 has been modified for direct fire against tanks. And its 13-pound armor-piercing shells are accurate at distances of several miles.
Now, the Germans had started by the summer of 1917 to train their gunners in anti-tank work. And the first real evidence we have of this is a location on the Cambrai battlefield at a village called Flesquières, where a line of British tanks run across the front of a German battery trained in anti-tank fire.
And the tanks, with their fuel stored inside, are highly vulnerable to field guns.
Petrol, the gasoline, was actually here in the front, 25 gallons of it either side. So the chances are that if a shell came in, the tank would ignite. It would probably then set the ammunition off, the tank would blow up, and nobody would come out of it alive.
Tanks suddenly appeared to our front around Flesquières. I ordered sights to be set at 700 meters. And with our third shot, we knocked out a tank. In short order, we followed this with 3 more. Then, with my 1 remaining gun, dealt with 4 more tanks.
It was like a shooting gallery. The British tanks were rolling over the hill, not knowing what was coming. He was waiting for them, knowing what was coming.
At close quarters, with direct fire, our courageous artillery destroyed all tanks within range. An impressive number of these expensive pieces of fighting equipment were strewn around the battlefield like so much scrap iron.
In 2 days of fighting, the Allies lose 179 tanks, but take Flesquières, clearing the way to their main objective, Cambrai.
it's really regarded as a tremendous success. This is a victory. The success of Cambrai, however, is illusory.
At the Battle of Cambrai, which is often referred to as the first big tank battle. Yeah, the tanks made good progress. They covered ground up to 30 kilometers. But what's always forgotten, the German stormtroopers took back the same area within a few days and with very few losses.
And now the Germans come up with another response to the rolling British armor. A monster tank of their own. History's first tank-on-tank battle is about to begin. In World War I, a tank has become the Allies' best bet for crossing German trenches. By 1917, hundreds are in action on the Western Front. But unknown to the Allies, the German High Command has been secretly developing a tank of their own.
The misconception many people of our age have is that this was an easy task. Building an armored vehicle in the First World War was an enormous challenge. It's like nuclear technology nowadays.
By March 1918, a year and a half after the debut of the British tank, the German Empire sends a 30-ton monster to the front. The A7V is powered by two 100-horsepower gasoline engines, protected by half an inch of side armor, and armed with a 57mm main gun and 6 heavy machine guns.
The German tank, in use in 1918, is a strange beast in many ways. It is, however, very big. It mounts a big field gun right in the nose, and it's got machine guns. Lots of people in there, 18 to 23 people, so it's pretty crowded in there. But at Villers-Bretonneux in 1918, it goes into action.
April 24th, 1918. The Germans, armed with their new tanks, capture Villers-Bretonneux and send the tanks south to the nearby village of Cashy. 3 British tanks advance, unaware that they're about to make history.
The order came, proceed to Cashy, hold it at all costs. Suddenly, an infantryman shouted through our flap, "Look out, Jerry tank's about." I looked out. There, some 300 yards away, a round, squat-looking monster was advancing, and farther away to left and right hauled 2 more of these armed tortoises. A great thrill ran through us all. So we had met our rivals at last. For the first time in history, tank was encountering tank.
The most interesting thing about this fight is both sides didn't have the slightest idea how to fight a tank-to-tank battle. Both sides were astonished at the sight of the other, and both sides were improvising. And after a second of astonishment on both sides, the British fired the first shot in the first tank battle of history.
We kept on a zigzag course. The right gunner made a sighting shot.
Three British and 3 German tanks bear down on each other over the shell-cratered ground. The lead German tank opens fire with its main gun. Hitting both female Mark IVs and blowing holes in their sides. Their machine guns are useless against the heavy armor of the A7V. They withdraw.
2 of their Mark tanks fled the battlefield, not because they were scared, but because they were female tanks, so they just had machine guns. But the male Mark tank, the 3rd Mark tank with a gun, shut it out with the A7V.
With his fellow tanks in retreat, Mitchell's tank must now face 3 German A7Vs alone. April 1918. 3 British and 3 German tanks meet in a battle unlike any in the history of warfare.
In the first ever tank-on-tank battle, we've got a very confused situation where we, for the first time, find that we're engaging an enemy tank we've never seen before. They see it, they engage it, and it simply starts firing rounds at the British tanks and is able to cause a lot of damage.
After his 2 companions are forced to retreat, British Commander Frank Mitchell must now face 3 German A7V tanks alone.
The right gunner made a sighting shot. The shell burst some distance beyond the leading enemy tank. No reply came. A second shot boomed out, landing just to the right. But again, no reply. Suddenly, against our steel wall, a hurricane of hail pattered, and the interior was filled with myriads of sparks and flying splinters. My face was stung with minute fragments of steel. The Jerry tank had treated us to a broadside of armor-piercing bullets. The ground was heavily scarred with shell holes. We kept going up and down like a ship in a heavy sea, making accurate shooting difficult. Another raking broadside of armor-piercing bullets gave us our first casualty, the Lewis gunner, after piercing the side of the tank. We turned. I took a risk and stopped the tank for a moment.
The Mark IV is now a stationary target. The lead German tank opens fire with its main gun.
The pause was justified. And a carefully aimed shot hit the turret of the German tank, bringing it to a standstill.
The shot instantly kills a gunner and mortally wounds 2 others.
Another roar, and yet another white puff at the front of the tank denoted a second hit. Then, once more, with great deliberation, he aimed and hit for the 3rd time. We had knocked the monster out.
The 2 remaining A7Vs creep forward. If they both pour concentrated fire on the British tank, it will be obliterated, along with Mitchell and his crew.
Now I thought we shall not last very long. We sprinkled one of them with a few sighting shells, when to my intense joy and amazement, I saw it go slowly backwards. Its companion did likewise, and in a few minutes they both had disappeared from sight, leaving our tank, the sole possessor of the field.
It's all over in minutes. This first chance encounter in the spring of 1918 between the Germans and the Allied armies becomes a defining moment in the history of modern warfare. Seven months later, the Great War finally ends.
Although tanks can't be said to win the war, the fact that they're available is very, very important for the Allies. They're part of that mix which allows ultimate victory to be achieved.
From 1914 onwards, all sides used new technology to get out of the stalemate of the trenches. The main thing about the tank is not its armor and its arms, but its mobility, the potential to break through lines and to create chaos and confusion. The Germans always wanted to fight a war of movement, and they saw, okay, these tanks could be the right instrument to do so.
The advent of tanks changes warfare completely. It will never be the same again. Once you've let this out of the box, you can't put it back again. The motto of the British Tank Corps is through the mud and the blood to the green fields beyond. And that was what had been looked for throughout the Great War. And that was what they hoped to achieve.